Hello, everyone on YouTube. Here is another edition of Gritty Girls Podcast, YouTube style. Hi, and welcome to the Gritty Girls Podcast, where we explore gritty topics and ideas. I'm Christina Lee, and I host the show along with Leslie Campbell, my co-host, and we've decided to launch a new series to our podcast called Gritty Musings. Thoughts about the various truths and observations about life that we want to delve into, especially ones that aren't always dinner table conversations. You can think of these as short essays that give you something to mull over. And so, what are we mulling over today? Today's Gritty Musings was also written several years ago after listening to something especially poignant that made me take a look at my ideas around forgiveness and compassion. I wonder where you will land after hearing about a very brave man who takes forgiveness to the very edge. When I hear people say to forgive, I have the mental image of a man who did a public talk hosted by a show called The Moth. I don't actually know what he looks like since I listened to the podcast version of the show. In my mind, he's a bearded, shaggy-haired, middle-aged man whose creased, weary face isn't bitter, even though his daughter had been murdered some years before. He described her as a dedicated teacher in an inner-city school, a rather typical young teacher passionate to help children who didn't get enough attention at home. One day, when she arrived home after school, a man was inside her apartment waiting for her. He asked for money, which she gave, and fortunately, he left. Her father said she had been compassionate with the man, someone from the neighborhood who seemed to have mental health issues. But not too long after, he broke in again. This time, instead of money, he wanted sex. She told him for that, he would have to kill her first. And so he did. The rapist was caught, tried, and sentenced. Though he may be imprisoned, the father of the woman he murdered does not cage him in hate. Instead, he says he has forgiven the man. During visitation hours one day, they embraced. This is the kind of forgiveness that I visualize when the topic is raised. Even though I am touched by the story, even inspired, I believe forgiveness is largely a myth. The word forgive in dictionary.com is to grant pardon for an offense, to absolve, or to cease to feel resentment against the offender. When the father wakes in the morning, when he's having his coffee, does he get a flash of his daughter in a joyful moment? Or is he pained by violent images of her last moments? Our brains do this, for better or worse. It holds on to the painful moments in our lives in order to keep us alive, to protect us. But often, that means we remember how our loved ones died and not how they lived. When I think of my uncle now, who died 10 years ago of liver cancer, I first see the face that became his just before death. It was a gaunt face, skin darkened many shades by his failing liver, and a stark contrast to his belly, which was distended with toxic fluids the liver could not process, and that his kidneys could no longer cleanse and excise. In those final days, it was difficult to meet his eyes. I remember him that way first before my mind shifts to his infectious laughter, which he had plenty of in the years we were fortunate enough to be with him. These stories create a romanticism around forgiveness, I believe, a heroicism and a deliverance that for most victims and their families never transpire. There's the belief that if they forgive, they will find relief, a dissolution of their bitterness that ultimately it will lead to freedom. I once interviewed a mother whose daughter was murdered, and her pain made it uncomfortable for me to face her. I didn't know what to say to someone grieving so intensely. It seemed that she found it painful to be alive while her daughter could no longer live out a life that had been planned. She seemed resigned to live inside her pain because how could a world exist without her daughter in it? A world that allowed her daughter to die in such a vile way. She was nearly finished with her communications degree at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs when she was grabbed by the waist and thrown in a car as she was walking from the parking lot to her friend's apartment. Two men drove her to another part of town, raped her, and stabbed her to death. Her mother attended every hearing and court proceeding until she heard his guilty verdict and death sentence. It was what she wanted. Would forgiveness give her freedom? It's a bit aggravating, actually, even offensive, this tease of a promise of salvation. They didn't do anything wrong other than to suffer deeply from their despair, but that pain is so excruciating that they end up feeling that they must have done something to deserve this, and thus to dangle the hope of forgiveness that it will provide relief is a dangerous premise to offer up. Perhaps for the very few, very rare individuals, it is possible that forgiveness is like a baptism, pain washed away and giving way to new flesh, new hope of a deeper meaning to the loss, not something senseless. Maybe. I did write this several years ago, and so rereading this made me think about whether I do feel the same way. Is there a change of mind? I do think that it would be optimal to be able to forgive in the way that this father forgave. It does seem like a deliverance for him. So maybe as we evolve enough, maybe that is the best way. But I believe it is a hard thing to accomplish. So I guess we can muse on and wonder. That's our gritty musing for the day. Thanks for listening. We're still a small and new show, so we'd love for you to help us out by subscribing and rating us wherever you listen to our show. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Look for our handle at Gritty Girls. We're on Instagram too, where you can watch our journey unfold at Gritty Girls Podcast. Until next time, listen to understand, seek out growth, and keep the heart and mind open. All right, another one. Thanks, YouTubers, for staying with us or finding us. And you can also find us on your favorite social media. And thanks for being here. Until next time.